In 2023, the Social Security tax rate is 12.4%, split equally between you and your employer. Social Security is a pay-as-you-go system. That means we as workers pay into the system, and the contribution is used to pay for the current retirees. Based on the most recent Social Security Trustees report, by 2034, the Social Security Trust Fund will deplete. Starting in 2034, Social Security can only pay 77% of the benefits. What happened to our Social Security? What went wrong for this 85-year-old program? Are we still able to reform it? For people who are still working today, do we have to worry about not getting paid in full when we retire? Today, let's talk about why Social Security has an increasing shortfall, why our government hasn't done anything to reform Social Security since 1983. What policy options do we have left? Will Social Security go bankrupt? Social Security is one of the largest and most important federal programs. As of 2023, 1 in 5 Americans receive Social Security payment. About 160 million workers and their employers contribute to Social Security through the payroll tax. Even though Social Security is a large program today, it was much smaller when it was first created in the 1930s. In 1935, President Franklin Roosevelt signed the Social Security Act. The Great Depression was clearly a catalyst for the Social Security Act, and some of its provisions were intended to offer immediate relief to families. That being said, Social Security at its core is an insurance against destitution in old age. In the following 50 years, the program was expanded dramatically. The government made various amendments to change Social Security. Broadly speaking, the changes mainly affected payments and benefits. On payments, the combined Social Security payroll tax rates have increased from 2% to 12.4%, a six-fold increase. The payroll tax ceiling has also increased dramatically over the years. On the benefit side, the program has expanded to cover more people. In the beginning of Social Security, only about half of the civilian workers were covered by Social Security. Over time, we added dependent children, widows and widowers, regular farm workers, domestic workers, some self-employed persons, and disabled workers. Today, about 94% of workers are covered by Social Security. When the system has more money coming in than going out, there's a surplus. The surplus is saved into Social Security trust funds. The trust funds are then invested entirely in U.S. Treasury securities. By the end of 2019, the trust funds had accumulated nearly $2.9 trillion, earning an average interest rate of 2.2% during that year. The demographic changes in the U.S. have created increasing challenges for Social Security. Baby boomers are now retired, people are living longer lives, but at the same time, the fertility rate has dropped. So the system now is paying out more benefits than they're collecting from current workers. Since 2010, Social Security has had a shortfall. That means the agency isn't collecting enough tax revenue to cover what it's paying out. So what did we do between 2010 and now? Well, we're tapping into the trust funds to pay for the gap. Now the trust funds are projected to deplete by 2034. If we don't do anything, then people retire after 2034 won't be paid with their scheduled full benefits. Instead, they will get about 77 cents on the dollar. Many people are also worried about the sustainability of Social Security. Only 51% of the working population have confidence in Social Security. Today, I have the pleasure to talk with Andrew Biggs. Dr. Andrew Biggs is the Senior Fellow at American Enterprise Institute. In the mid-2000s, Dr. Biggs was the Principal Deputy Commissioner of the Social Security Administration, where he oversaw Social Security's policy research efforts. In 2005, as an associate director of the White House National Economic Council, he worked on Social Security reform. When Social Security was designed, like in the 1930s, right? Mm-hmm. What was the original goal of the system?
It's not as if there was one person with a fully thought out philosophy and plan for Social Security who designed the system. It was put together, by committees with competing interests and priorities, the same as policy is today. Mm-hmm. At the time Social Security came together, you had obviously the Great Depression was going on, so there's a more pressing need for assistance for older people who didn't have income. So the economy had changed. People were moving off the farm. People were not living with their children as much. So there was this need that sort of didn't exist as much before. There was also kind of a movement around the world towards providing old age pensions. So the U.S. was a little bit late to the game on that. But we already did have a number of state level programs that were essentially kind of welfare assistance for the aged to try to reduce poverty among seniors.
If you were to design this system in the 1930s, would you still design something as a pay-as-you-go or something that's more like an actual savings account?
The interesting thing is when Social Security was passed, the idea was we have a pay-as-you-go system because of all these people starving in the Depression. That was actually not how Social Security worked. When Social Security was passed in 1935, it was built up to be a funded program. We would pay into Social Security over the course of our lives, and then we would get benefits out of it. They'd have a true trust fund. And people on the verge of retirement then, they would have gotten a little bit, but they wouldn't have gotten full benefits because they hadn't paid in over their lives. What happened is Republicans didn't like the idea of building up this huge trust fund because they're like, well, what's the federal government going to do with it? Which, fair enough. And so they were on board in 1939 with changing Social Security to start paying out benefits immediately. Mm-hmm. So taxes started being collected in 1937. The first retirement benefits were paid out in 1940. You can see why Social Security was so popular. You're getting retirement benefits, you paid in for 3 years. So it was a fantastic deal for people, a massive transfer of money in the trillions of dollars. So very, very popular. But the problem with pay-as-you-go financing is you have so little flexibility of changing on the fly because the problem is twofold. On the one hand, you've told people they've paid money in, they've earned a benefit. The reality is they haven't, there's no money set aside. So that the only way you can change things is by affecting future generations. They don't want to be affected. It's people call it a Ponzi scheme, and I don't mean it in a pejorative sense, but it is that way of doing things.
Social Security is the president's theme, as in Washington he discusses the outlook of the individual.
The millions of today want and have a right to the same security that their forefathers sought in this nation. The assurance that with health and the willingness to work, they will find a place for themselves in the social and economic system of the time. Because it has become increasingly difficult for individuals to build their own security single-handed, government must now step in and help them lay the foundation stones, just as government in the past has helped lay the foundation of business and industry. We must face the fact that in this country, we have a rich man's security and a poor man's security, and that the government owes equal obligations to both. But national security is not a half and half measure. It is all or none.
How is our system different from those in other countries like the UK, Australia, and New Zealand?
What I'll say is, we tend to draw often on the kind of the British traditions. You'd say we're similar in a lot of ways to the United Kingdom or Canada or Australia or New Zealand. But we tend to have a different kind of system from them. Those countries, their old age programs tended to focus a lot on preventing poverty and old age. They're very focused on the low end. But they didn't provide as much benefits to people at the middle or the top. They were really, poverty-focused programs. In the U.S., I know they discussed that because people were aware of how the British system worked, for instance, and that was in the mix. But what happened was a system that turned out to be very different. It was a system that was constructed not to look like a welfare program to fight poverty more. It was built more to look like a universal sort of private retirement plan or private insurance plan, in which everybody paid in. Everybody who pays in will get some benefits out. Benefits increase along with the amount that you pay in, but not proportional. And what that means is the system is progressive. That people who have low earnings get a higher payback, a higher rate of return, a higher what we call replacement rate, which is a benefit as a percentage of pre-retirement earnings. That's higher for low-income people, and then it declines for high-income people. The backdrop, as I understand the history of this, is if you talk to people who are in social policy, they'll say the philosophy that Americans had at the time was a program for the poor is a poor program, an idea that a program that was focused on the poorest Americans wouldn't have sufficient public support. So we had to make a program that benefited everyone.
The system in the US is more designed to incentivize work, right? If you pay into the system, you get to benefit from it when you retire. So do you think there's that element compared to other countries? And in European countries, for example, their unemployment rate is higher, their labor force participation rate is lower. So I'm not sure whether there's any connection there.
Having a program that is geared, towards contributions and work, in theory, should encourage work more than one that is sort of more of a welfare type system, a universal system with not contingent work. At the same time, the devil is in the details. Any sort of Social Security program like ours is going to have an effect on work. It's going to have an effect on personal saving. The system we have, relative to sort of a more targeted system like we have in Britain or Australia, I think it probably encourages work a little bit more than those do, but it also discourages saving more than those do.
A lot of young people today don't know much about Social Security. So why should we even care about it?
So the thing that makes Social Security reform interesting is the program is so big that these changes, they don't just affect Social Security's finances. They don't just affect the federal budget. Social Security is big enough to affect the economy as a whole. Most other federal programs really aren't. And so it's how you fix Social Security isn't just a matter for Social Security, it's a matter for the whole country. And so we need to think bigger about these kinds of questions.
Do you worry about people undersaving if this is left to their own?
The proposal really has two parts. One is that, over time, we would transition from the current Social Security benefit formula to a flat benefit, where everybody would get the same amount. And the way that would come about is very quickly the minimum benefit would be increased to eliminate poverty and old age. Over the matter of about 25 years, the maximum benefit would be scaled down. So eventually we're all getting the same benefit. In addition to this flat benefit plan, the idea is that the federal government would ensure first that everybody has access to a retirement plan at work. Today, most people could save through a 401k at work, but a lot of people can't. The idea is everybody would be offered that at work. And then second, everybody would be automatically enrolled in that. Automatic enrollment does a lot to influence people's participation rates in 401ks.
I'm just wondering why the original structure hasn't been changed much.
Then I spent a year or so at the White House National Economic Council working on Social Security. A couple of years before then at the policy office at the Social Security Administration, doing the same, developing these things. And I'll give President Bush credit in the sense he was very committed to Social Security reform. He put a lot of political capital into it. At the same time, though, coming out of that, I'm not sure we went about it in the right way.
For younger workers, the Social Security system has serious problems that will grow worse with time. Social Security was created decades ago for a very different era. In those days, people did not live as long. Benefits were much lower than they are today. And a half century ago, about 16 workers paid into the system for each person drawing benefits. Our society has changed in ways the founders of Social Security could not have foreseen. In today's world, people are living longer and therefore drawing benefits longer. And those benefits are scheduled to rise dramatically over the next few decades. And instead of 16 workers paying in for every beneficiary, right now it's only about 3 workers. And over the next few decades, that number will fall to just 2 workers per beneficiary. With each passing year, fewer workers are paying ever higher benefits to an ever larger number of retirees.
I could describe for you and your intrepid viewers how the Bush proposal worked. It would take me about 10 minutes to describe it because most of the stuff is highly technical changes that you won't understand to a benefit formula that is already highly technical and you won't understand. And these changes happen incrementally over time and you have no idea what it looks like in the end. In other words, they took the current system and they sort of tweaked it, little changes every year to the current system. And it was just indecipherable. I had people from Capitol Hill calling me up. These were like senator staff saying, we don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, literally, we don't know what you're talking about. It was gobbledygook. It just was going over their heads. Coming out of that experience, it changed not just how I thought about what Social Security reform ultimately should look like, but it changed how you should go about developing a Social Security reform. Most plans take the current Social Security system and they say, let's tweak it somehow to make it more sustainable going forward. And that ends up this very confusing kind of formulas. What I said is, let's start with a blank slate and ask ourselves, if we have somebody who's age 18 today, they've never worked a day in their life, they haven't paid a penny into Social Security, they're not owed a penny by Social Security, we can design for that person any kind of system we want. If we were designing it, what would that system look like? It's this sort of blank slate approach and saying, let's forget about whatever we've inherited. We're going to deal with the underfunding and all of that. But let's just design the best system we can for those people. People are so wedded to this sort of benefit formula program that we inherited, they just can't think differently. They're not thinking about what are the goals of a Social Security program. What do we want to do for Americans? They're thinking about the program itself becomes the goal, not the people who serve.
Or, you were talking about the 18-year-old, right? But, people who are already, like myself, who are already paying into the system. So we would still belong to the old cohort. And then so that's still the pay-as-you-go system.
Sure.
But suddenly you lose the incoming workers, right? The workers who would have been paying into the system to benefit, to pay for the benefit of the retirees.
You don't actually, because those people that 18-year-old is still going to pay into the system. His taxes, to be honest, are still going to be used to finance current benefits. And we have to do that because the system is underfunded, which if you're somebody who's retired today or retiring today, you're entirely under the current benefit point. If you're somebody who's entering the workforce today, the 18-year-old or younger than that, your benefit will be based on this new flat benefit plus, universal retirement plan. If you're somebody in between, you get some mix of the two. And you want to try to avoid cutting benefits people have already earned and say, we're going to honor what you've earned in the past, but we have to change the system going forward. I think people can understand that concept.
For the working population, do we have any estimate, more or less accurate estimate of how much money we're going to get when we retire from Social Security? Do we understand the complex formula as I see it and can make an educated prediction?
I did a paper probably 10 years ago where we used data from Health and Retirement Study, where people were right in the verge of retirement. They had to be less than 2 years from retirement. And the HRS would ask people, what do you think you're going to get from Social Security when you retire? And then, because the way the HRS works, we could revisit those same people after they retired, and they were asked, how much do you get from Social Security? So we have their predicted benefit and their actual benefit. Now, of these people who are right at the verge of retirement, somewhere around a third wouldn't even guess. The survey would ask, what do you think you're going to get? They're like, I don't know, no idea. And then among those who did guess, there's a ton of people who got much more than they thought they would get. There's a ton of people who got much less than they would get. We talk about Social Security as a defined benefit system, predictable benefit. The problem is it's so confusing and complicated. A large chunk of Americans have no idea what they're going to get from Social Security until the first check arrives.
For the simple universal benefit system you just proposed, we're not changing the benefit of retirees. We're not even changing the benefit structure for people like me, but we're merely changing people who are in the future, right? So why is there so much resistance to the change?
Because if you look at other countries, we say the UK has gone through a couple of pension reforms, I guess 3 since that time. Other countries have done the same. Why can we not solve these problems? And the inclination, a lot of Americans say, we need to vote these bums out and get new bums in. So you vote the bums out, you get new bums in. And that doesn't change anything. And part of this, maybe we just attract people to elected office here who are not as strong as in other countries. And that's possible. So if we wanted to continue paying full benefits to people in the future, which everybody says they want to do, what we needed to do back then was start gradually raising the payroll tax. So instead of paying 12.5% today, people might be paying 15%. If we had done that, a little bit of that over time, Social Security would be solvent, and nobody would have to worry about the trust fund running out. They'd all get their full benefits, so on and so forth. But guess what? If you're just a middle-income person retiring in 2034, when the Social Security trust fund is currently projected to run out, if we had taken that strategy, gradually raising taxes, over your lifetime, you would have paid an extra $125,000 or so in taxes. If you're somebody who's at the tax max, the maximum taxable wage of $160,000 this year, you would have paid over $300,000 in additional taxes over your working career. Now, here's the deal. The trust fund may go insolvent. Those benefits are not going to be cut. It's just politically, they're not going to be. So that middle-income worker, by refusing to go along with Social Security reform, he saved himself $125,000. That high-income worker, $300 grand extra in his pocket because he did not pay his way. And so you have a lot of people, whether it's common Americans or politicians, saying we shouldn't cut the benefits that Americans have paid for. But the thing is, they didn't pay for it. We knew 40 years ago that if you wanted those full benefits, you had to pay more for it.
The current generation, the millennials, are probably going to get 80 cents on the dollar when we retire. But based on the idea of let's just push it to the future generation, and my generation, the millennials, can still push it to the next generation. So there are basically 2 scenarios, right? Like if I just ask you to make a prediction, say 2034 comes around when the trust fund depletes, are we going to get any kind of policy changes before that, or are we just going to continue this almost like a Ponzi scheme?
Yeah. I think you will get policy changes before then, not much before then, but they don't want to have the trust fund actually running out on their watch. So a year or so or 2 years before, they'll get on it. What will happen, I suspect, will be sort of fig leaves in the short term. They're not going to cut benefits precipitously. They'll just keep transferring general tax revenue to it. Or they can adjust the tax rates. There's a lot of different things they can do to keep benefits flowing. I mean, the thing to remember when it comes to trust fund running is by the time, say, the final year the trust fund solved, call it 2033, and they still bonds in that trust fund. the general fund of the government, essentially meaning income taxes, corporate income taxes, is going to transfer somewhere around $300 billion a year from the general fund to Social Security to repay those trust fund bonds and keep benefits being paid. When the trust fund runs out, if we cut benefits by 25%, we also have no more need for those general revenue transfers. In other words, we have $300 billion sitting around, just looking and staring you in the face, even as people have this massive benefit cut. Probably they'll just keep transferring it, or they could do things like, let's raise the payroll tax rate a bit, but then use that $300 billion extra in general funds to reduce other taxes. A lot of this is appearances. They want to make it look like this system is holding together, even though they're just kind of using fig leaves. The question is what happens over the long term. I suspect you'll get some benefit reductions over the long term, probably not huge ones.
How has this all played out for Democrats and Republicans? Are any of the policy changes in Social Security going to influence the political future of the two parties?
If we keep on the current road, this is going to be a win for Democrats, a loss for Republicans. You already see Republicans recalibrating on this. So they don't want to be the guys saying, if you went back to the Bush administration, George W. Bush, they wanted to fix Social Security entirely by reducing benefits, not a penny in tax increases if they can get away with it. They knew they'd have to compromise, but their preference was entirely in the benefits side. Now, I think Republicans understand they're not going to get anything close to that. But this is going to be almost an entirely revenue finance thing unless they can somehow change the dynamic. So they're recalibrating. You get somebody like Josh Hawley in the Senate, or President Trump, or maybe J.D. Vance saying, "Hey, we shouldn't cut Social Security." Partly what is going on is, I don't want to look like a fool, or that I surrendered when the time comes in 2034 or whatever. Some of these guys are realizing we're not going to get anything like what we really want, so let's change what we say we want. I mean, at least the Democrats are like, look, we don't want to cut benefits, but we'll raise taxes. Republicans have this completely, it's not just philosophically incoherent, it's mathematically incoherent. So probably an eventual deal will have some fig leaf reductions in benefits in order to let the Republicans make their surrender. Congressional Democrats, like in the House, like 90% of them have co-sponsored a plan to dramatically increase taxes on rich and poor alike, to pay full benefits and then expand benefits. And yet the dirty secret is even they don't really want to raise taxes, or at least they don't want to vote on the tax increase. They co-sponsored the plan. They had 2 years of complete control in which they could have brought it up for committee hearing and voted on it before, and they did none of those. So cutting benefits isn't popular, raising taxes isn't popular either, yet we got to do something. So it's something will happen. But I just think as more and more people shift from being workers paying in to retirees collecting from the program, and as those retirees often are Republican voters, they're fully hedged. The Democrats don't want to cut their benefits. Republicans won't want to either.
So have you talked to any congressman or congresswoman about your flat benefit system, and what kind of responses did you get?
You get some. There's been some who have been very interested in it. There's a couple who talked about it on the campaign trail. They got hit for it, as you'd expect. But largely, they just are not focused on Social Security in general. So it's not like you talk to them and they're like, well, I want to do Social Security, but your plan stinks. It's never anything like that. It's a lot of them just not very focused on it. But I've talked to members of Congress now, and it's the most. I'll just say the most movement on Social Security now is Senator Bill Cassidy from Louisiana is really pushing a bipartisan plan for Social Security. That and I applaud his leadership, because neither of the leading presidential candidates were anything. So he says we've got to get Democrats, Republicans together and do this. The problem is his plan is based around the politics of what we have, where neither Democrats nor Republicans are willing to make any difficult choices. So he has his plan. He wants to literally borrow $1.5 trillion and then invest it in stock. Based any ideas, we're just going to live off the interest and all that. I could give you a whole list of reasons why this doesn't work. But the idea is, the justification for that approach is Congress can't do anything more than that. That we're not capable of fixing this program. There's no country on earth that is financing their Social Security program by borrowing trillions of dollars and investing in the stock. What we have is the argument for the Cassidy approach is essentially Congress can't do any better. This is the best we can expect from it, which is a real indictment of the quality of governance that we have in the United States. That it is the most depressing idea that we simply can't manage and be stewards of these programs that are so important to the country, to the economy, and to people's lives. But that's kind of where we are these days.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Andrew, for speaking with me today. This is really fun.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.